The life scanner picked up a biosignature where nothing should be alive. I stared at the readout on my wrist display, convinced it was malfunctioning. The abandoned mining station on Keswick 9 had been derelict for 30 years, atmosphere leaking, power dead, every valuable resource stripped decades ago. Nothing survived here except the occasional hardy microbe. The scanner insisted otherwise. One faint biological signature, humanoid classification, located in what my structural maps identified as the old medical bay. 3 years of solitary prospecting in the outer reaches had taught me that anomalies were usually equipment failure, occasionally dangerous, and almost never worth investigating. The smart move was to note the location, report the malfunction to my ship's maintenance system, and continue scanning for the rare Earth deposits I'd come here to find. Instead, I found myself moving toward the medical bay entrance, emergency medkit automatically pulled from my belt. Old habits from my combat medic days, apparently stronger than 3 years of deliberately cultivated isolation. The door had to be manually overridden, its power cells long dead. I forced it open and immediately understood why my scanner had flagged this as unusual. An Etherian woman lay collapsed on what had once been a medical examination table, her breathing so shallow I initially thought she was already dead. Her clothing, quality craftsmanship now stained and torn, suggested wealth or status. Her luminous skin, characteristic of her species, had dimmed to almost human pallor, indicating severe illness or injury. Most concerning was the monitoring bracelet on her wrist, still active, its display showing vital signs that made my medical training scream urgent intervention. I performed immediate triage assessment. Severe dehydration, malnutrition indicating weeks of inadequate nutrition, multiple organ systems under stress, evidence of psychological trauma in her flinch response when my scanner touched her skin. She had maybe 48 hours before multiple organ failure became irreversible. "Can you hear me?" I asked in standard galactic, activating my translation software. "I'm a medic. I'm going to help you." Her eyes opened, barely, focusing on me with desperate intensity. She tried to speak, but her throat was too dry, her body too depleted. I established IV access using emergency supplies from my medkit, providing immediate fluid replacement and basic caloric support. As I worked, I noticed details that transformed this from medical emergency into something far more complicated. Precision scars on her wrists and ankles suggested restraint over extended period. Her physical condition indicated deliberate deprivation, not accidental abandonment. The monitoring bracelet was broadcasting continuously. Someone was watching her vital signs in real time, tracking her slow deterioration from afar. Someone had put her here. Someone with resources had chosen this isolated location specifically because they knew she wouldn't be found. I checked the bracelet's transmission log. It had been active for 73 days, sending data back to a source my equipment couldn't fully trace but recognized as Etherian government encryption. This was political. This was intentional. This was someone being left to die while people with power watched it happen. Every instinct I'd cultivated over 3 years of isolation said to report this to authorities and walk away. I'd fled human space specifically to avoid complex situations involving politics and moral compromise. I'd built a life around simple mineral surveys and deliberate solitude. But looking at this dying woman, I saw every patient I couldn't save during the war. Every casualty of systems that valued order over compassion. Every reason I became a medic before politics and regulations destroyed that calling. I made a decision that would probably ruin my carefully constructed solitary existence. "All right," I said to the unconscious woman, adjusting her IV flow. "Let's get you out of here. Then we're finding out who did this and making them answer for it." Her eyes opened again, clearer now with some hydration restored. She whispered something my translator struggled with, but I caught one word clearly. "Why?" Because someone should have found you weeks ago, I answered. Because leaving people to die is wrong regardless of who ordered it. Because I'm apparently terrible at staying uninvolved. I lifted her carefully, alarmed by how little she weighed, and began the journey back to my ship. Behind us, the monitoring bracelet I'd removed from her wrist continued broadcasting to whoever was watching. They'd know soon that their plan had changed, that someone had interfered. I probably should have cared more about the consequences. Getting her stable enough for transport took 12 hours of careful medical intervention aboard the Wanderer's Hope. My ship was small, designed for solo prospecting, but I'd invested heavily in medical equipment and life support systems. Old paranoia from my medic days about being prepared for worst-case scenarios. Now those preparations were keeping an exiled Etherian princess alive. Her name was Seralyne. That information came in fragments as she drifted in and out of consciousness, while I provided IV nutrition, corrected electrolyte imbalances, and treated the various infections that develop when someone's immune system shuts down from malnutrition. She was the youngest daughter of Queen Maethara of the Etherian ascendancy. She'd been accused of treason, specifically, advocating for political reforms that would limit absolute royal authority. I argued, she whispered during one lucid period while I changed her IV bag, that the ascendancy's isolationist policies were harming our people. That alliance with younger species could strengthen rather than weaken us. And your mother saw that as betrayal. She saw it as rejecting everything she represents, everything she built. Seralyne's voice was bitter, so she exiled me, not to a penal colony where I might become a martyr, but to that abandoned station where I would simply disappear. The monitoring bracelet, so she could watch, could know exactly how long I was taking to die, Seralyne's voice broke, could give me time to reconsider my positions before it was too late. Did you? I adjusted the scanner monitoring her cardiac function. Reconsider. No, despite her weakness, conviction carried through. I was right. She was wrong. That my own mother chose cruelty over dialogue only proves my point about absolute power corrupting absolutely. We'd been traveling for 3 days, heading nowhere specific while I stabilized her condition and figured out our options. Return to Etherian space meant execution. Her exile was formal decree. Human territories might offer sanctuary, but harboring an exiled Etherian princess could strain already fragile diplomatic relations. I was considering neutral stations when the priority communication arrived, marked with Etherian diplomatic codes. Against better judgment, I accepted. The man who appeared identified himself as Ambassador Keyleth, senior diplomatic advisor to Queen Maethara. His expression was carefully neutral in that way that meant he was carefully controlling anger. Mr. Jensen, we're aware you've recovered Princess Seralyne. The Queen wishes to negotiate her return. Return to die. My voice was flat. The princess requires medical intervention that only Etherian facilities can properly provide. We're prepared to guarantee her safety and appropriate treatment. Appropriate treatment, like the medical bay on Keswick 9 where she was left for 73 days. Keyleth's composure cracked slightly. You don't understand the political complexities. I understand someone left a woman to die slowly while monitoring her vital signs. Everything else is rationalization. There will be consequences for interfering in Etherian internal affairs. Yeah, I figured. I cut the connection. Seralyne had been listening from her medical bed. You shouldn't have done that. You've made yourself a target now. Probably. I checked her vitals improving, but still critically weak. But I've got principles that survived losing my medical license and my military career. Not giving up on them now. Why? She looked genuinely confused. You don't know me, you owe me nothing. Why risk yourself? I was quiet for a long moment, remembering a field hospital in a war zone, a patient dying because I followed orders instead of medical judgment, the inquiry that followed. 3 years ago, I had a patient die because I did what was politically expedient instead of medically necessary. They took my license, ended my military career, destroyed everything I'd built. I promised myself I wouldn't make that mistake again. I met her eyes. So no, I don't know you, but I know what's right. That's enough. Seralyne closed her eyes and I thought she might be sleeping. Then she spoke quietly. Thank you for seeing me as a person instead of a political problem. You're welcome. Now rest. We've got a long journey ahead figuring out how to keep you alive and free simultaneously. As she drifted off, I plotted course toward the only organization that might help. The Frontier Advocates Coalition, a loose alliance of reformers and refugees working to challenge authoritarian governance across multiple species territories. It was a risk, but everything about this situation was already a risk. Might as well risk it on the right side. The coalition representative who met us at the neutral station was a Vedrani woman named Thera, with the kind of practiced calm that comes from extensive crisis management experience. We've been monitoring Princess Seralyne's case, she explained after security protocols were satisfied, and we were in a private meeting room. Her reform advocacy made her notable before the exile. What happened after made her a symbol. Seralyne, now strong enough to walk with assistance, sat across from Thera with wary dignity. A symbol you want to exploit. A symbol we want to give voice to, Thera corrected gently. There's a difference. But yes, we want something in return for providing sanctuary and political protection. My testimony, Seralyne said flatly. Public statement about what my mother did. Evidence that absolute monarchy leads to cruelty, even against royal family members. Exactly. I watched Seralyne wrestle with the decision. Despite everything, I suspected she still hoped for reconciliation with her mother. Public testimony would make that nearly impossible. I need time, Seralyne said finally. Time to recover. Time to think about whether this serves justice or just revenge. Thera nodded. Understandable, but time is limited. Your mother is pressuring human and neutral governments to return you. Some are considering compliance to avoid diplomatic incidents. The coalition offered sanctuary at one of their secure facilities, a converted station with medical capabilities and defensive systems. We accepted, though I remained wary of trading one form of control for another. Over the following weeks, as Seralyne's physical condition improved, I learned more about her life before exile. She'd been educated in diplomacy, trained in governance, genuinely believed in serving her people through thoughtful reform. I loved my mother, she admitted one evening while reviewing physical therapy exercises. Admired her strength. I thought I was honoring her legacy by trying to evolve it. I didn't realize she saw evolution as betrayal. You think she can change her mind? Part of me hopes. Part of me knows that hope is probably foolish. Seralyne's expression was distant, but she's still my mother, even after everything. Then coalition intelligence brought news that forced decision. Queen Maethara was preparing a formal address to the Intersystem Council, claiming her daughter had been abducted by human extremists, and demanding unified action for her return. The Queen was reframing the narrative, positioning herself as concerned parent rather than a tempted executioner. Thera presented this during an emergency briefing. If we don't counter that narrative immediately, you'll be returned. And this time there won't be monitoring bracelets, just quiet execution. Seralyne looked at me, seeking input I wasn't qualified to give. What do you think? I think your mother's trying to weaponize your suffering for political gain, I said honestly. I think the truth deserves to be told, but I also think you're the only one who can decide if that truth is worth the cost. Seralyne sat in silence for several minutes. Then she straightened and I saw the princess underneath the trauma survivor. I'll testify, not for revenge, not even for your reform movements. She looked at Thera. But because my mother shouldn't be allowed to turn my near death into propaganda, the truth matters, even when it's painful. Especially when it's painful, I added quietly. Seralyne smiled, first genuine smile I'd seen from her. Especially then. The Intersystem Council hearing was scheduled for 3 weeks later. We spent that time preparing testimony, gathering evidence, and building the case that would either protect Seralyne or destroy any chance of reconciliation with her mother. I found myself wondering which outcome she was hoping for. The Intersystem Council chamber was designed to accommodate dozens of species, vast enough that individual voices needed amplification to reach all corners. I watched from the public gallery as Seralyne took the witness position, still showing physical effects of her ordeal, but standing with dignity that commanded attention. She told her story without embellishment. Her advocacy for reform, her mother's increasing hostility to dissent, the formal exile decree, the 73 days alone on Keswick 9 watching her own vital signs deteriorate, the monitoring bracelet that ensured her mother knew exactly how slowly her daughter was dying. My mother had real-time data on my condition for over 2 months, Seralyne stated clearly. She knew I was dying. She chose to watch rather than reconsider. That's not justice for treason. That's systematic cruelty. The medical records I'd compiled supported every claim: dehydration, malnutrition, multiple organ stress, psychological trauma. The recovered bracelet data showed the Queen's office receiving updates throughout, never once initiating intervention. Queen Maethara's representative attempted counter-testimony about necessary discipline for treason, about human exploitation of family disputes, about interference in internal affairs. But the evidence spoke louder than political spin. Then something unexpected happened. Queen Maethara herself requested to address the council, not through representatives, but personally via secure transmission. The Queen appeared on the central display, and I saw where Seralyne inherited her bearing. Maethara looked older than her public images, tired in ways that suggested she'd slept poorly for months. "I have heard my daughter's testimony," the Queen began, voice controlled but strained. "I cannot deny its factual accuracy. I did exile her. I did monitor her decline. I did." She paused and something cracked in her composure. "I did condemn my own child to death because she challenged my authority, and I convinced myself it was justice when it was merely power protecting itself." The chamber fell absolutely silent. Seralyne was right about the reforms, about our isolation, about absolute authority leading to absolute cruelty. Maethara looked directly at the camera as if seeing through it to her daughter. I told myself I was protecting civilization. I was protecting ego. I told myself she needed to learn respect. I needed to learn humility. The Queen's next words were barely audible. "I am sorry. To my daughter, to my people, to this council for forcing you to witness a mother's failure. I cannot undo what I've done. I can only acknowledge it was wrong." Seralyne in the witness position had tears streaming down her face. "I have initiated formal reform proceedings," the Queen continued, voice strengthening. "Limiting royal decree powers, establishing independent judicial review, creating protected channels for dissent. I'm submitting to constitutional changes that will prevent future monarchs from wielding unchecked authority. It won't repair what I broke, but perhaps it will honor what my daughter tried to build." The transmission ended. The chamber erupted in debate. I made my way down to where Seralyne stood, still processing. She saw me and asked, "Do you think she meant it?" "I think she's a politician who knows when she's lost," I said honestly. "But I also think that was a mother recognizing what her pride cost her. Both can be true." "What do I do now?" "Whatever you want. You're not dying on a rock anymore. You're not anyone's prisoner. You get to decide." Seralyne looked at the chaotic chamber. "I want to go home, not to return to how things were, but to help build what comes next. To hold her accountable while accepting her acknowledgement." She looked at me. "Will you come, as friend?" "Friend works," I said, realizing it was true, "though I'm terrible at politics." "Good, I need someone who will tell me the truth." But the reconciliation wasn't simple. Seralyne returned not as exile, but as architect of reform. Her mother abdicated absolute authority while remaining symbolic leader, punishment and redemption simultaneously. I stayed as promised, splitting time between Etherian space and prospecting, finding I was capable of connection without losing myself. 6 months later, Seralyne and her mother had their first private conversation since exile.